Hi, so today we're going to talk about morphology. This is the first of two presentations on morphology, so this is an introduction to morphology. We'll talk today about morphemes, inflectional affixes, and derivational affixes. First of all, what is a morpheme? A morpheme, their words can be divided into smaller units called morphemes, but words can also be divided into smaller units called syllables. So don't confuse those two things, because some morphemes are more than one syllable. Like the morpheme ity is a suffix, and that is actually more than one syllable. So morphemes can be divided into, or words can be divided into morphemes. Some examples of morphemes are prefixes, suffixes, and root words. Cat and s are both morphemes of the word cat. Cat is the root, and then s is an affix that adds to the end of the root. Words with one morpheme are simple words. Words with more than one morpheme are complex words. That one's just really straightforward. It's pretty easy to remember. So if it just has one morpheme, whether that morpheme has just one syllable or more than one syllable, it is a simple word. And if it has more than one morpheme, like see this is sing plus then that becomes a complex word. This is sing plus s, that's a complex word. This is sing plus ing, and that's also a complex word. This one's a little bit more tricky to figure out. So morphemes that can stand alone are free morphemes. Morphemes that cannot stand alone are bound morphemes. So watch is a free morpheme. Whether that's a noun or a verb, it's still a free morpheme because it is a word by itself. But when you add the ing or the ed or the re to it, it is still a free morpheme, but those are bound morphemes because those things are not words in and of themselves. Ing is not a word, it's an affix, so it's a bound morpheme. So just like in phonology, where we have allophones of the same morpheme, or allophones of the same phoneme, we also in morphology have allomorphs of the same morpheme, and it's very, very similar. So an allomorph is a variation of a morpheme, and allomorphs of a morpheme are the same morpheme pronounced in different ways, just like allophones of the same phoneme are. So an example of allomorphs are a and an are allomorphs of the same morpheme, and it's a good idea in linguistics to start to memorize base examples. This is a good base example. If you wanted to try to remember what an allomorph of it is, you could remember that, oh yeah, a and an are both allomorphs. S and z are allomorphs of the plural marker s. So in English spelling it is s, but they are both morphemes of the same. They're both allomorphs of the same morpheme, s and z. In a more complicated example is like public and publis. They're both allomorphs of public, of this English spelling of public. So if you have just the word public, it still has the k sound, but when you add something to it, it becomes publicist. The k becomes a s sound. So when you're talking about morphemes, you've always got to talk about root spaces and affixes. Roots are just like what we learned in elementary school. They're simple words that are kind of the beginning of more complex words. So table is a root, but complex words consist of a root and an affix. So table is the root of the word tables. It's also the root of the word tabled. Different than what you learn in elementary school is that there's a base also. So a root turns into a base when you get several affixes on it. So the root adds an affix and becomes a base for another word. So paint is the root here. This is painter is the base of painters. So paint is the root. Painter becomes the new word. And then if you want to add an s to that, then the base of that is painter, painters. So the root is paint, the base is painter, and then the word becomes painters. There's three different types of affixes. There's a prefix, suffix, and infix. The prefix is just something that comes before the root of the word. So re is a prefix in redesignation. The suffix comes after the root of the word or the new base of the word. Well, still after the root of the word, right? So ity is a suffix in clarity. An infix, you did not learn this one in elementary school because these don't happen in English. Not when you're trying to write for a teacher, they don't anyway. So those come inside the root of a word, and they're more common in other languages. They're in English, it's more in colloquial speech where, like, for example, California, you may have said something along those lines, right? And so the freakin is put inside the middle of the word So besides the three different types of affixes, the suffix, prefix, and infix, there's two different categories of affixes, inflectional and derivational. So inflectional affixes they don't change the meaning or the core meaning or the part of speech of the word. So S is an inflectional affix. Basket turns to baskets. It's still just more than one basket. It's still just a basket, but there's more than one of them. So adding S does not change the meaning of basket. S adds plurality, but otherwise the meaning's the same. They're also productive, meaning each affix usually attaches to only one class of base. So ed is an inflectional affix that attaches to verbs. So watch is a verb, and you can add an ed to it to become watched, and it's still a verb. They're also semantically transparent, so it's easy to identify the contribution of the meaning to the meaning of the word. So apostrophe S is an inflectional affix. Mary is a noun, and then marries is a noun who owns something, and it clearly just, in English, it just means that it's giving possession to the word. So in English, there's actually 8 inflectional affixes. And notice that they are all suffixes. The affixes in English, they're inflectional affixes in English are all suffixes. So nouns have 2. There's the S for plural, dogs, cats, roses, and there's the apostrophe S for possessive, John's car, Alex's ice cream, Nicole's doll. Remember too not to confuse it with the spelling with IPA, right? So in IPA you wouldn't see the apostrophe S, it's just the sound S or Z or uz, right? In adjectives, there's 2. There's ER for comparative, so taller, stronger, meaner, and EST for superlative, tallest, strongest, meanest. For verbs, there's 4 suffixes that are inflectional. S or ES, those have the same function, right? For third person singular. He eats pizza, she sings opera, she teaches English. See how the allomorphs are different? There's S, Z, and uz here, but they're all the same morpheme. There's ED for past tense. They walked to the store, that he wanted a turtle. ING for progressive. We are walking, we are talking. EN or ED for past participle. She has spoken, she has walked to the store. So it keeps the meaning of those words and just adds some functionality, different kind of functionality to them. So if it's not inflectional, it's derivational. Derivational affixes, they typically change the meaning or part of speech of the word. So shun is a derivational affix, transform is a verb, and then it becomes transformation, which actually has 2 affixes on there, but it changes to a noun. Occurs before inflectional affixes are attached. So all and I's are derivational affixes, and ed is an inflectional affix. So in the word verb, which is a noun, which is your root, and then you can add al to it, this derivational affix, and it changes it from noun to adjective, and then verbal becomes the new base, and so you still have the root verb, the base verbal, and you add I's to it, another derivational affix, and it changes from adjective to verb, verbalize. And then you can take that new base, and you still have the same root, verb, and the new base is verbalize, and you can add a ed to it. For English spelling, it just ends up being a D in this case, but it's the END inflectional affix, and that keeps it as a verb here and attaches at the very end. So we added all of our derivational affixes before we added our inflectional. They're also less productive than English affixes. They have restrictions on the class of bases to which they can attach, meaning the lexical category, verb, noun, or whatever. So ity affixes to adjectives. Responsible is an adjective, and it becomes responsibility and turns into a noun. And derivational affixes includes all of the prefixes in English. That's not the case in all languages, but in English it is. And all but eight of the English suffixes. Remember those 8 affixes that we looked at, or yeah, those 8 inflectional affixes we looked at were all suffixes. So those are not derivational, those are inflectional. But it does include all of the prefixes and a whole bunch of suffixes. So re is a derivational affix, and so wire becomes rewire. There's a little bit of confusion sometimes when you're talking about suffixes. So I think in English you just have to remember that all of the prefixes, I meant to say prefixes, that all of the prefixes are derivational. So the idea here, it doesn't change the category in this situation, the lexical category, but it does change the meaning quite a bit. So wire becomes rewire. Then there's also complex derivations. Words can have multiple leveled structures, right? So there's some really tricky ones in here. So I actually added colors to try to help you guys follow this a little bit. So the root is verb, and then we added verbal. We added al, an affix, al, and that changed it into an adjective. So verb is a noun. Isn't that funny? But verb is a noun. It's a thing. And you add al to it, and it becomes an adjective. And so that's got the red brackets around it. Then verbal is the new base. So the red is the new base. And we add eyes to it, another affix, and it becomes a verb. And see how that yellow one is the verb. And that's the new base now. Still has the same root. The root is the word verb. And then you're going to add the ed affix to it. And so it's verbalized plus an ed affix. And so that's a new, or it's not a new verb, it's the same verb that's changed its functionality a little bit. So you don't have to do the colors when you're doing yours. I just was trying to make it a little bit more clear to you guys how to do this. This is equivalent to a morphology tree. You can do the trees if you prefer, or you can do these. I think if you're just writing by hand, the trees are probably a little bit easier to see what you're doing. But if you're typing, these are a lot easier to create than the trees when you're typing. One thing interesting about these derivations of these words is that sometimes they're a little bit complex in that words can have more than one possible structure and it changes the meaning. So the first one here is unhappy, and it becomes unhappiness, right? So it's the state of unhappy, right? Then the next one is happiness, and then it can turn it into unhappiness. And so that is not happy. So they're a little bit hard to explain, but the meaning becomes different. Unhappiness is different than unhappiness. So those are a little bit more complex, and they can be more than one way that you create those trees. So we talked today about morphology. We talked about what morphemes are, that they, remember, don't confuse them with syllables. Morphemes are chunks of words that have some meaning. There are simple and complex morphemes. Simple, and this really is pretty simple, right? Simple is just one morpheme, and complex is has more, or they're simple and complex words, sorry. Simple is just one morpheme, and complex has more than one morpheme. And then there's bound and free. So the bound ones have to attach to something else to have any kind of meaning. They can't live by themselves. And the free ones can just live freely and go about their business without any of those bound ones if they would like to. We also talked about allomorphs. Remember, those are similar to allophones. So allomorphs are two sounds that's two morphemes that have different sounds but mean the same thing. We talked about roots and bases. Remember, the root is the very beginning of the word, and then the base is whatever something is attaching onto. We talked about affixes, their suffixes, prefixes, and I keep saying those in the wrong order. You should say prefix, infix, suffix, right? Because prefixes come first, infixes are in the middle, and suffixes are at the end. And then inflectional affixes, they attach to a word for functional purposes, but don't change the category. They're always, in English, they're always suffixes. And derivational affixes attach to a root or base to change the meaning or category, usually. There's always a little bit of a caveat to that. So